Amtrak. It's America's big red, white, and blue railroad. To rail fans like myself, Amtrak is a wonderful way to travel and see the country, but to basically everyone else, it's a slow, expensive, and outdated way to travel. Meanwhile, in Europe and Asia, trains are cheaper, faster, and more efficient than planes. So why is it that way, and can we change it? Believe it or not, the United States was not always so far behind on passenger rail technology. Let's go back to the late 1950s. Beginning in 1959, a project was started to connect Japan's two biggest cities, Tokyo and Osaka, by a train that would be able to take less than 4 hours. In October of 1964, Japan unveiled that train known as the Shinkansen, the world's first true high-speed rail. This train looked like no other, with a pointy and aerodynamic nose and individually powered cars as opposed to a locomotive. After getting over 200 billion yen over budget, service began on October 1st, 1964, just in time for the Tokyo Olympics. The world watched as this revolutionary train made its maiden voyage over 300 miles of brand new straight track that tunneled through mountains and whatever else was in its way. In just 3 years, the Shinkansen had already served 100 million passengers. This inspired countries around the world to begin looking into making their own high-speed rail networks. By 1965, countries such as Germany and France already had prototypes for their own high-speed rail systems. German Federal Railways managed to get the existing Class 103 locomotive up to 120 miles per hour between Munich and Augsburg, just 10 miles per hour short of the Shinkansen's top speed. France had a proof of concept for a hovering train called the Aero Train, which was not much of a train at all, just a hovercraft thing on a track. Later on in 1965, even the United States got in on the fun, when the High-Speed Ground Transportation Act of 1965 was passed. This bill created the Penn Central Metroliner service between New York and Washington, D.C. with the top speed of 120 miles per hour, which was completely on par with the other high-speed rail networks around the world. There were a few shortcomings of this train, such as the cars being somewhat unreliable and track conditions keeping it from going faster than 90 miles per hour for a good deal of the route, but overall the Metroliner wasn't a bad start at all. After all, the United States could have been the one that tried to put a hovercraft on rails. 2 years later, in 1967, a concept train made by the United Aircraft Corporation known as the Turbo Train managed to get up to 171 miles per hour on the same line that the Metroliner used. Wait, pause. An American train in 1967 went 20 miles per hour faster than the current fastest train in the United States? Correct. To this day, the fastest train in this country, Amtrak's Acela, only gets up to 150 miles per hour in service, and that's only for a short stretch of track in Massachusetts and Rhode Island. Though in 2020, Amtrak updated the track between New Brunswick, New Jersey and Trenton, New Jersey to add another 150 mile per hour segment. As the 1960s came to an end, the country's passenger rail network was becoming outdated and dilapidated as people began driving instead of taking the slower and dirtier train. This lack of ridership meant that in order for privately owned railroads around the country to stay afloat, they would have to begin cutting off all funding to their passenger routes. Railroads continued dropping their passenger services into the early 70s. In 1970, the state of American passenger rail was looking so bleak that the government had to step in and begin funding passenger services. President Richard Nixon signed the Rail Passenger Service Act into law, creating the National Railroad Passenger Corporation, later known to be Amtrak. Amtrak was to be a government-subsidized but for-profit corporation that would merge the 26 passenger rail lines across the country into one. All but 6 of those railroads gave up their services to Amtrak, although many of these railroads still had freight operations, meaning Amtrak would be allowed to use these routes that were previously owned by the privately owned trains, but the tracks would still be owned by the privately owned freight railroads. This ended up meaning that Amtrak to this day only owns about 600 miles of their 21,000-mile network, about 3%. The Metroliner service continued on, changing names and equipment over the years, but never going much faster than 120 miles per hour. As the rest of the world began to improve their high-speed rail, the United States made no changes to what they had, which was a relatively slow high-speed rail that serves a very tiny portion of the country. Meanwhile, everywhere else around the country had diesel-powered trains that would mostly stay below 80 miles per hour. A combination of not having enough funding and government bureaucracy made progress on any step towards the future slow and painful. The Metroliner service would continue into the 90s as America's fastest train. Meanwhile, countries like Japan and France's trains were doing upwards of 170 miles per hour in regular service. It seemed like all was lost until 1992 when Amtrak received funding from the government to improve its northeast corridor between New Haven and Boston. Before this, the NEC was only electrified between Washington, D.C. and New Haven, Connecticut. The New Haven to Boston line, known as the Shore Line, was to be straightened and electrified to allow for higher speeds between the two cities. Construction began in 1996 and included installing over 1,550 miles of catenary wire, 15,000 cat poles to hold up that wire, 140 miles of continuous welded rail, a new signaling system, and 25 power stations to provide electricity for the line. Just in time for the year 2000, construction was completed, right in time for, wait, the Acela? When did that happen? Well, during the course of the construction up north on the shoreline, Amtrak was working hard to provide the first true high-speed train in American history. Throughout the 90s, Amtrak had imported 2 trains from Europe to test their lines. The candidates were the German ICE-1 and the Swedish X2000 high-speed train sets. Both were retrofitted with the equipment necessary to run on American lines. Both of these were initially supposed to be the exact trains that Amtrak wanted to use on the NEC, but after both showed their specific flaws, Amtrak decided they would commission their own new train. Alstom and Bombardier were contracted to build a new French TGV-inspired train, which would later be known as the Acela Express. The new Acela began service in the year 2000 to relatively positive reception, but the same issue that plagued the Metroliner also affected the Acela. The infrastructure that it ran on was not optimized for high-speed rail. Most of the line south of New Haven was built between 1830 and 1917, causing trains to stay under 100 miles per hour. Acela service continued throughout the 2000s, not changing a whole lot. In 2012, Hurricane Sandy hit the East Coast very hard, damaging infrastructure all along the Northeast Corridor, especially in the New York area. Of all the damage caused by Sandy, the most detrimental was the North River Tunnel flood. The North River Tunnel is a vital piece of infrastructure that connects New York Penn Station to New Jersey, crossing under the Hudson River, carrying 450 trains and 200,000 people every day. During Sandy, the tunnel became flooded with salt water from the Hudson, damaging electrical infrastructure, drainage systems, and most importantly, the walls of the tunnel. Since 2012, salt water has been slowly eating away at the walls of the tunnel, and it's only a matter of time before something bad happens to these tunnels that are over 100 years old. It's extremely unlikely that these tunnels will collapse, but as time goes on, they will continue to age, and the ancient electrical equipment will begin to fail more and more, often causing delays. One of the ways Amtrak plans to improve its service includes what is known as the Gateway Project. This project has plans to build a new tunnel under the Hudson River. Amtrak said that there are 2 options. One is to rebuild the existing tunnel built by the PRR over 100 years ago, which would mean taking one track out of service at a time to renovate, bringing the tunnel's capacity from 24 trains per hour to 6 per hour. The other more ideal solution would be to build a completely new tunnel north of the existing one and seamlessly transition train traffic from the old one to the new one once the new one is completed. This new tunnel is estimated to cost $9.8 billion, but progress has been very slow. Former President Donald Trump refused to fund this vital program unless he got his border wall with Mexico. Luckily for Amtrak, now that Trump is out of office, Biden will be in control of this funding. President Biden has been a lifelong Amtrak supporter, and as a senator in Delaware, traveled on Amtrak daily on the same route that this project is located on. He has also picked another Amtrak fan as Secretary of Transportation, Mayor Pete Buttigieg. Secretary Buttigieg has worked with Amtrak as mayor of South Bend, Indiana, and will likely push for more funding for Amtrak. Finally, the future of this project is looking pretty bright. In addition to this tunnel, the Gateway Project also includes fixing other ancient infrastructures, such as swing bridges and catenary. Amtrak has also made early proposals to improve its track conditions on the Northeast Corridor. As I mentioned earlier, the Acela hits its top speed of 150 miles per hour for only about 40 minutes of the 6-hour trip between Boston and DC. In places such as Connecticut and New York, the speed limit for trains is as low as 40 miles per hour, greatly increasing trip time. It's not cheap to make these improvements, with an estimated cost of $117 billion, which Amtrak doesn't have. For reference, Amtrak received $1.6 billion in funding for infrastructure projects from the government in 2019. Will Amtrak ever receive the funding to do that? Well, right now, probably not. Even though Biden is a big supporter of Amtrak, I doubt that he'll be willing to give Amtrak $117 billion, but I do think Amtrak's funding will be increased, meaning that at least some infrastructure can be improved. Amtrak is already working on improving some infrastructure in New Jersey to accommodate speeds of up to 165 miles per hour. Also, you may have noticed the elephant in the room: Amtrak's new equipment coming to the Northeast Corridor. The original Acela train sets are all 20 years old and at this point are due for replacement. In 2016, Amtrak announced that they were working with the French manufacturer Alstom to build a new fleet of high-speed trains capable of up to 220 miles per hour. For more information on those, click the video in the top right corner. These new Liberty train sets will enter service in 2021 with an initial top speed of 160 miles per hour, and Amtrak claims they'll eventually have a top speed of up to 220 miles per hour. So it seems Amtrak does expect that they'll be able to upgrade at least some of the infrastructure to handle modern high-speed rail speeds. Overall, the future is bright for Amtrak, with some projects already in progress and a president that supports it, although you may have noticed that I've only talked about the Northeast Corridor throughout the entire video. What about the rest of Amtrak's system? Well, it seems as of now, Amtrak for the most part will be limited to 79 miles per hour in most places, although in recent years Amtrak has upgraded some Midwest routes to get up to 110 miles per hour, and there are plans to even get up to 125 in some places. As for long distance routes, they're not receiving any upgrades and even being decreased to 3 times a week, which is a good financial decision on Amtrak's part. Other than that, there aren't really any other projects going on to make Amtrak faster around the country. It seems that if Amtrak doesn't get to work soon, other profitable potential high-speed rail routes such as Los Angeles to Las Vegas and Dallas to Houston will soon be swooped up by private railroads such as Brightline and Texas Central. Luckily, Amtrak has at least realized what its main problems are. Their long-distance trains are slow and lose money, and it's financially best to start running them less, and they need to update their ancient infrastructure. Once these two issues are fixed, and as the pandemic begins to end, Amtrak may finally turn a profit, which it hasn't done since its inception in 1971. Once this happens, if it ever does, not only will Amtrak have more money to spend to upgrade service, but it will show to the government that it can be an efficient railroad that deserves to be funded more. Amtrak will certainly have to be on their A-game to compete with up-and-coming private high-speed rails, but as America starts to recognize the environmental and economic benefits of trains, it'll probably become a more popular mode of transportation. This means more money, which means better trains. This concludes today's episode of High Speed Rail Week. This episode is part of a bigger series of 4 other mini-docs. Click the video on the left to see yesterday's episode and the video on the right to see tomorrow's episode. If you're watching this when it's new, there's probably no video there because tomorrow's video isn't out yet, so be sure to stay tuned for tomorrow's episode at noon Eastern. Otherwise, thanks for watching. Until next time.